ActionFigureResource.com. Yesterday's toys, today's treasures.
The Kenner Batman series, a collecting guide from ActionFigureResource. Over the past 5 decades, Mego, Kenner, and then later Hasbro and Mattel, among many other manufacturers, have clamoured for the licensing rights to immortalise Batman, his allies and arch-enemies as action figures. Kenner released a vast range of colourful Batman action figures in the 90s, and it's these that this guide will be focusing on mainly. The Dark Knight Collection, 1990. Flashback to 1989, when the first Tim Burton Batman movie launched. The figures released to tie in with this were made by Toy Biz, who had spent the previous years releasing the DC Comics superhero line, which themselves were modelled extremely closely on Kenner's own Superpowers collection, even down to card details. Now, Batman the Animated Series didn't air until September 1992, so there was a 3-year gap where Kenner reclaimed the Batman license from Toy Biz and made a series of figures clearly inspired by Burton's movie, down to Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson being featured on the packaging. This was called the Dark Knight series, which was the first, but definitely not the last time, this moniker was used for Batman in toys. They made the decision in these 2 waves to provide only Batman and Joker figures. The huge range of villains would follow in later lines. A phrase was coined to describe lines like this that regurgitated the hero time and again in various outfits: Batman syndrome. Be prepared for a lot of that coming up. Aside from a few more outlandish costumes, nearly all of these figures followed the slightly more realistic, for 1989, aesthetic of the movie. Again, the crazy, colourful outfits came later. Despite the grand hype running up to the launch of this line and the displaying of a versatile range of action figures and role-play items in the Kenner Action Toy Guide for 1990, items like the Jokermobile and the Batcave Command Center were actively postponed to be produced with later lines. A distinguishing feature was that all figures were designed with a collector-friendly, flexible approach, which in turn set the tone for greater success for the company's future releases featuring the dark and formidable hero. The entire Dark Knight line has remained in demand and popular with collectors. The 3 most collectible figures were the Deluxe Crime Master Edition figures, which came boxed and had a very limited retail distribution. By far the most valuable in the line, though, is the Knockout Joker from the second wave, released in 1991. Batman Returns, 1992 to 1994. With their Dark Knight collection established, Kenner snagged the license to directly produce figures for the next Burton movie from Toy Biz. They followed a very similar design and retained the darker look. The Bruce Wayne in both series is a rare item, as it was the only Batman at the time to have the face of Michael Keaton. 2 new villains, Catwoman and Penguin, also received plastic treatment in this lineup. Catwoman became scarce on toy shelves at the time, as she was the breakout character of the movie, and many collectors bought multiple figures due to her brand new sculpt. However, to the disappointment of many collectors, the figure of the Penguin, rather than being an even smaller Danny DeVito, was just a repaint job done on Kenner's previous edition of Penguin on the Superpowers line, and thus languished on toy shelves. He bore little to no resemblance to the sewer-dwelling creep from the movie. The surprises in this line were the Penguin Commandos, C4-packing seabirds designed as henchmen. At the time, these were very poorly received at retail, and many stores were left holding dozens of them. Decades on, and looking at a sea of nearly identical Batmans, odd, unique little figures like this become prizes for collectors. But obviously at the time, kids rejected them. The most sought-after character in this series, though, was the fresh face of Tim Drake, aka Robin. A coveralled mechanic version of Robin was actually planned to be in the 1992 Batman Returns movie. Marlon Wayans was cast, he was paid, he apparently still gets residuals, but they cut the part as there were too many characters in play already. The Kenner Robin was designed after the comic books coming out at the time and added more variety to the line, bringing it closer to what the animated series would be. The most popular and valuable items in this line among collectors are the 3 Toys R Us deluxe figures and the 2 electronic figures, all of which have increased substantially in value over the years. These were followed by a Batman Returns 2 line 2 years later in 1994, but why this was released separately in the middle of the animated series run remains a mystery. The Animated Series, 1992 to 1994. Batman Returns hit theatres in June and the toys were already on the shelves. In September 92, the animated series finally hit our television screens, delivering what for many Bat fans remains the definitive version of the Caped Crusader. Kenner were of course ready to roll with a line that continued the moulding and design of their first two series, but expanded out the roster of villains with screen-authentic, surprisingly faithful, clean and bold plastic renditions, all delivered in the more colourful palette of the new show. Some of the best sculpts ever came from this line, and there are several of these figures that command big prices on the secondary market, most notably antagonists like, ironically, the Penguin, Riddler, Two-Face, Catwoman, Poison Ivy, and Bane. The Robin dragster is one of the rarest, with speculation ranging from the theory that the vehicle was discontinued due to safety deficiencies, that it was made solely for the Canadian market, and that the mould was destroyed following a factory fire. Mask of the Phantasm, 1994. Fans of the animated series will tell you of the great oversight that was Mask of the Phantasm. It cost a paltry $6 million and holds up to this day as one of the very best Batman movies ever made. It was released on Christmas Day in 1993, coughed into only a few theatres, made back $5.6 million, meaning it lost $0.4 million plus whatever they paid for marketing, and then headed to VHS. The stigma against animation meant that Batman Forever, made 2 years later in 1995, raked in $336 million, that's 60 times as much as Mask of the Phantasm, because in the West, live action is for grown-ups and animation is for kids. Never mind the mature themes of sacrifice and loss in Phantasm, or the groin-grabbing neon lunacy of Forever, which Joel Schumacher reputedly directed under the remit, "Remember everyone, we're making a cartoon." It's notable that the C word is something that, with its pointed name, Batman the Animated Series, and later Superman the Animated Series, made a clear effort to differentiate themselves. There was a small subline of the Kenner toys tied in with Mask of the Phantasm. The titular, stalking figurehead of Menace had his, or rather her, identity revealed in maybe the most spoilerific packaging for a figure since Citizen Kane came boxed with his sled Rosebud. Despite this plot-scuppering decision, the Phantasm remains the figure to score from this assortment, along with Jetpack Joker. Crime Squad, 1994 to 1996. Disappointingly, the subsequent 4 series of the Batman animated line were mostly remodelling of old moulds, with a very few new sculpts. Many of the Batman variants were simply repaints in oddly coloured suits with a big plastic thing like an enormous grappling hook, a scuba pod, or a rocket pack. This pair of features, often very unappealing to collectors, exemplifies toy lines in the 90s and why so many lines like Mattel's Masters of the Universe in 2002 eventually ran out of steam. All too often, a kids' TV show relies heavily on toy sales. The worst example that still sticks in my craw being the amazing Green Lantern the Animated Series, cancelled after 1 season due to poor sales of the terrible figures from the terrible and entirely unrelated movie. Kenner's 4th animated series wave did contain more figures from the support cast, though still more outlandish Batman variants. But, with the inevitability that comes with not learning from one's mistakes, its 5th line, Crime Squad, focused almost entirely on Batman again. These waves were well known for containing some truly embarrassing costumes that stretched the possibilities of what Bruce Wayne might prepare for well beyond breaking point. Landstrike Batman, Torpedo Batman, Sea Claw Batman, Airstrike Batman, Supersonic Batman, Piranha Blade Batman, none of which, it's important to note, actually showed up in the show. It was Batman syndrome writ large. Ground Assault Batman was one of the most baffling figures, clad in an outfit exactly coordinated with the Spider-Man villain Green Goblin, even down to the purple glider. It's difficult to imagine how many checks this had to go through to get to shelves without anybody noticing. Meanwhile, the lurid colours of Disaster Control Batman achieved the exact opposite of his aims. Kenner released 2 runs of this Crime Squad line over several years.
ActionFigureResource.com. Yesterday's toys, today's treasures.